I barged through my front door and sprinted up the stairs. I made a run for the bedroom door before kicking it open. I know he's in here. God damn it. Where are you hiding him this time? I screamed. My wife Susan was shocked to see me back from work and was sitting in bed reading a book. I don't know what you are talking about, honey. I've been here all morning. I could tell from the red glow on my wife's cheeks and the beads of sweat rolling down her forehead she was doing more than reading a book. I know that scumbag is here. I can still smell his stinking aftershave. I grabbed the blankets and ripped them off the bed. Susan tried her best to cover her naked body. It's 2 in the afternoon. Why are you in bed naked? Susan looked like a rabbit caught in a headlight. She stuttered as her brain tried to make up a plausible answer. I began tearing the room apart when suddenly I heard the sound of labored breathing coming from the closet. I felt a rage of red mist descend upon me before whipping open the closet doors. As I drove back to work, I couldn't get the image of Mason Bradley and his fat gut on top of my wife. Intrusive thoughts about my wife's infidelities permeated my mind as I drove my truck. At 37, my life wasn't where I expected it to be. My dreams of running my own company were as broken as the beat-up pickup truck I used to drive to work. My truck rumbled up to the gates of the steel mill. The security guard at the gate barely acknowledged my existence as the truck roared past him. As I turned into the car park, I noticed my boss Big Ed waiting for me. As I got out of my truck, Big Ed came scurrying over. For a man who ran $1 million company, he always looked as if he was out panhandling for his next meal. His slacks were 2 sizes too big and he wore the same t-shirt every day. What are you doing tomorrow? Jack. I hated how Big Ed spoke to me. He had a habit of spitting after every sentence and would sometimes spit directly at me. I was going to surprise my wife tomorrow and take her somewhere nice. Big Ed hitched his slacks up onto his gut. Listen here now, Jack. My car has been giving me some trouble and I need you to service her. Couldn't you get someone else to do it? I could tell he was getting annoyed with my attitude. If you want your job Monday, you will do what you're told. He had me over a barrel and knew I couldn't afford to lose the only job the town had to offer. I'll be over first thing in the morning. I arrived at Ed's dilapidated mansion. Ed was outside with his car swooning over her like it was some beautiful young woman. His face lit up as he ran his hands over the bonnet of the truck. Be gentle with her. She's all I got, said Ed. Ed looked slightly smarter than his usual unkempt manner. You got a date, Ed. When the cats are away, the mice will play, said Ed as he gave me a mischievous wink. Ed pulled a red handkerchief from his back pocket and wiped the sweat from his forehead. I see 1 scratch on her, and I will snap your neck. I was weary from a long day babysitting Ed's car. All I wanted to do was throw my feet up and have a nice cold beer. I stepped in my front door and was suddenly hit by a familiar smell. It smelled like Big Ed's nasty cologne, but I was too tired to take much notice. My body ached as I grabbed a beer from the kitchen before collapsing onto my chair. As I sat there, sipping beer and reevaluating my life's predicaments, I noticed something sticking from the armrest of my couch. I walked over and picked up the red piece of cloth. The same red piece of cloth Big Ed used to wipe the beady sweat from his grubby forehead. I unfolded the cloth, and to my dismay, there was Ed's name embroidered in the hanky. I was heartbroken and furious. I knew what it meant, and all I wanted to do was tear the house down with my bare hands. But I knew better than to let my anger get the best of me. My eyes welled up as I sped down the country road. I turned the radio up full blast to drown out my intrusive thoughts. I was too embroiled in a battle with my conciseness to notice the dark figure walking in the middle of the road. By the time I noticed it was too late, I slammed on the brakes and covered my eyes before the car came to a halt. To my relief, I couldn't find any signs of someone injured. I convinced myself stress was making me go crazy. As I tried jumping back in my truck, I heard someone approaching from behind. Having trouble, buddy? I felt a cold chill up my spine. Something was telling me to run, but my legs had turned to jelly from fear. A dark figure stepped out from the shadows of the looming trees overhead. I thought I had hit someone with my truck. I nervously explained. I couldn't make out who I was talking to. All I could see was an outline of a tall, dark figure. I hear you're having trouble with your wife. Do I know you? I nervously asked. Suddenly the dark figure came into focus, revealing an old man. He took something from his pocket before handing it to me. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Big Ed's red handkerchief. How did you? I began stuttering. What is it you desire? Asked the old man. Suddenly a strange feeling swept over me. A feeling of intense euphoria crept up from my toes, flooding my brain. I wished every man who sleeps with my wife would get sick and die a slow, painful death. The words seemed to come out of my mouth as if someone else was saying. Suddenly everything began to spin, and before I knew it I was back in my truck. I reluctantly drove into work after spending a night in a dingy motel. All I wanted to do was punch Big Ed in his fat face, but with my marriage on the rocks, I knew I couldn't afford it. When I arrived, I was surprised to see Mason Bradley wasn't at his station. I didn't give it much thought until I saw Big Ed coming from the bathroom, looking like death warmed up. Hey, Ed, you don't look so good. Ed stood there looking pale as a ghost, trying to keep the contents of his stomach from ejecting from his mouth. I think it was something I ate, he explained as I took a step back from him. Has this anything to do with Bradley being out? I asked. Yeah, he was too sick to make it in today. Must be a bug doing the rounds. Over the next few days, I watched Big Ed get weaker until there was no sign of him. I had gotten word that Mason Bradley had died, and from what I was told Big Ed wasn't far behind. Since Big Ed wasn't in, we knocked off early. As I drove home I stopped at the local gas station to pick up some beers. Phil, the owner, was at the counter looking like he was about to pass out. You alright? Phil, you're looking a bit pale there, buddy. Phil covered his mouth, trying his best not to puke all over the counter. I'm after picking up this bug that's going around. It couldn't be, I thought to myself as I suddenly remembered the strange encounter had the other night. The one I was sure was just a strange dream. You look after yourself, Phil, and get yourself to a doctor. Will you give my love to that beautiful wife of yours and tell her I'll drop over her magazines once I feel better, said Phil before dashing for the bathroom. As I drove into my driveway, I noticed Mrs. Stevens standing outside her house looking distraught. What's wrong? Anne, I asked. It's Mike. They took him to the hospital. Who took him? Mr. Stevens was too distraught to get her words out. Men in hazmat suits. I felt the familiar feeling of despair rise from the pit of my stomach. Who else got sick? Bob, Tony from across the road. The guy who delivers the milk. They're dropping like flies. Days went by and news of men getting sick and dying all over town continued to trickle in. Suddenly, I was hit with the realization that the man I met a few weeks ago wasn't a figment of my imagination. I wrestled with the guilt of everyone dying and the heartbreak of my wife's infidelity. I didn't want people dying, and if this was my fault, I needed to fix it. I got in my truck and began driving the same road as before. I was overwhelmed with the thoughts of people dying and the guilt and grief it brought with it. As I drove, I suddenly spotted the old man sitting by the roadside. I slammed on the brakes and jumped from my truck. I ran to the old man before dropping to my knees. Please, I beg you. Whatever you have done, you need to take it back. The old man gave me a confused look, but it was what you desired. Why would you want to take it back? I was upset, but I didn't want people to die. Please, it's not what I desire, I cried. The old man put his hand on my shoulder. What is it you truly desire? All I want is my wife to love me and only me, I begged. Suddenly, I was overcome with that same feeling of euphoria. My world began to spin before I was suddenly back in my truck, and the old man was nowhere to be seen. As I walked in my front door, Susan was standing there waiting for me. She had a look on her face I had never seen before. She ran and threw her arms around me before kissing me passionately. I love you so much. Jack, can you please forgive me? Of course I forgive you. I always do. My wife's face lit up, and for the first time, I could feel a genuine sense of love from her, a feeling I always desired. "From now on you're the only man I want and need," she said as she led me upstairs to the bedroom. That night, we made passionate love as if we were the only two people that existed in the world. After we finished, we spent the rest of the night cuddling and planning for a better future together. The following morning, I woke with a splitting headache. As the days followed, I was stuck to the toilet puking my guts up. As I got weaker, the terrifying realization of the first wish hit me like a ton of bricks. I write this as I'm in the final throes of death as a warning to others. Be careful what you wish for. I know, by the title you're assuming I found something like spiders living in my coffee machine. I assure you, it was much worse. I'm a daily coffee drinker, not just daily, but all throughout the day. I wake up, I make a big pot of coffee, I drink 2 cups. I fill a thermos to bring to work and sip on all day. It's my slow drip of caffeine that keeps me alive at work. We have coffee in our break room, but it's always some sort of flavor like caramel chocolate. I don't hate that stuff, but I prefer simple dark coffee that tastes like the earth. So I make my own at home. About 2 months ago, my old coffee maker broke. It permanently switched to the self-clean mode that fills the coffee maker with steam. Basically, it turned into a coffee-scented humidifier. I still managed to use it for a few days, getting small cups of coffee in a very humid apartment before a friend offered me his old coffee maker. It still works fine. I just upgraded to an espresso machine. When he brought it over, he still had a full box of the filters. It was mostly clean, but still had a little water in it. The coffee pot had a lot of hard water stains on it, but that seemed normal. I washed the glass pot real well, filled it with warm water, and proceeded to brew a pot of just water. I figured running a pot of water through it would clear everything out before I brewed an actual pot of coffee. The next day I started my usual morning routine: make coffee, drink coffee, work, but this time my coffee tasted a little off and more earthy than normal. Did I forget to brush my teeth last night? I didn't worry about it and continued with my busy morning routine. The next few pots of coffee tasted the same, but I stopped noticing it as much. My taste buds must have been growing used to it. Then a coworker came up to me and started talking in a really hushed voice. They warned me that my office smelled like weed, and that I should take my jacket, or whatever smelled like that, out to my car so I don't get in trouble. I had a good laugh because I haven't smoked pot since college, then started sniffing around. When I opened my thermos, my coworker immediately identified it as the skunky smell. They made a joke that their old art teacher must have drank the same brand. Later that night, when I was laying in bed, I couldn't help but think about it more. Did my usual brand of coffee change flavor? Was I not washing my thermos out enough? Was my old broken coffee maker not brewing my coffee correctly? The mystery would have to wait until morning for me to figure out. Then morning came, and I completely forgot about it. By this time, I wasn't even noticing a difference in the flavor. I had only been using the coffee maker for about a week and everything seemed to go back to normal, except for the strong dank smell. It became a little joke in the office that my coffee smelled like weed. Eventually, the joke got around to HR, who then talked to me about it. The conversation was funny, and they knew I wasn't doing drugs on the job, but told me the smell was distracting to other people in the office, and that the smell was worse than just pot. I'm usually sensitive to strong perfumes, air sprays, etc., so I was very understanding about it. I told them I would just drink break room coffee for now until I could go grocery shopping for a different brand of coffee. The break room coffee wasn't terrible, some sort of turtle dark chocolate blend. I put up with it the next 2 days, Thursday and Friday. I didn't work of Saturday, so I brewed my own coffee at home. The smell was horrible. It didn't just smell like weed. It was more like a week-old corpse that also happened to be smoking weed. I unplugged the coffee maker, undeath scent diffuser, and put it on my back porch to get it out of the house. I couldn't step inside without gagging, So I opened all my windows and took the dog for a long walk to let it air out. About an hour later, I got back home and could smell it from about a block away. As I approached my house, I could hear some sort of tapping or knocking coming from my back porch. It was crows trying to break into the coffee maker. The lid was open and it was laying on its side, but the crows were trying to get in from the bottom. I put on a pair of gloves, scared the crows off, and picked up the coffee maker. There were little peck marks all over the bottom where the heating part is sealed. For a second I thought about getting a screwdriver so I could open it, but I wasn't going to keep it after this. So I decided just to throw it on the pavement and instead to break it open. I wish I would have just thrown it away. The coffee maker didn't shatter in a satisfying way, but more broke into 3 large chunks held together by wire. As the coffee maker hit the ground, it spilled its contents like some sort of terrible flesh-filled pinata. Some small rodent, most likely a mouse, had a litter of small pink babies and was storing food inside the bottom part of the coffee maker. When I made my first cup of coffee, they were all killed, likely from boiling water. Over the next week they decomposed inside the coffee maker, slowly adding flavor to my coffee. I work in private security. You probably pictured a muscular man in a 3-piece suit and earpiece when you read that. The truth is, I'm your average overweight Midwestern hick, assigned to guard a parking lot outside a local chemical plant. I work the midnight to 8 shift, so most of the night, I'm by myself. I work in a small connex that's been converted into an actual office. It's not terrible. It's insulated. There's an AC unit, a fridge, a microwave, and power. I can sit in there most of the night playing on my phone or reading my books. When I describe it to my friends, I call it my box. Every 2 hours, though, I have to get up and patrol the lot. It's a decent bit of exercise. There are 2 halves of the lot, separated by a small road, but it doesn't take too long to walk a large circle and make sure no one is breaking into employees' cars. I used to look forward to it, even. The problem started a week ago, on one of these patrols. I was walking the north lot, flashlight in hand, looking in car windshields and in the tree lines. As I started toward the south lot, I looked right into the lights down there for bright ones that lit up both lots. They're bright. So it hurt after spending so long in the box. While my eyes readjusted, I sort of let my mind wander and looked down at the ground. That's when something clicked in my brain. Something wasn't right here. I wasn't in danger, I thought, but something was unsettling me. Have you ever gone on vacation, far away enough to forget where you came from for a little while? Have you come back and found that something was missing or misplaced? You can't tell what it is, but you know. I figured it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the ground stretched out in front of me were 5 long shadows, flung out in a wide arc from me. Except, you may recall, that there are only 4 lights in the lot. The 5th shadow, stretching out directly in front of me, seemed to stare back at me just as hard as I stared at it. I looked over my shoulder, trying to figure out if perhaps a stray light from the chemical plant was causing it. It was 4 in the morning. The only lights on in the plant are on the other side, where the crews are working on cleaning and maintaining equipment. The shadow had moved. I don't know how. I don't know when. But I swear on anything I own that when I turned back around, the angle had changed. As if whatever was casting the shadow had changed positions. My walk back to the box was uneventful, with the shadow in front of me the whole time. I almost walked into a car a couple of times trying to keep my eye on it. But I made it, cracked open the door, just wide enough for me to shimmy inside, and locked the door behind me. It's dark in my box, with only the 4 windows to illuminate the space. I have my flashlight to light up the desk if I need to get something, and my phone to fiddle with, so I never needed the overhead lights. That night, I turned them on, and I immediately felt better. In the brightly lit room, I looked around and thankfully, the only shadow in the now isolated room was the one cast directly beneath me from the only light in the room. One man and one shadow, just as nature intended. It's been a week. I still have to patrol every 2 hours. I still have to walk the lot. I still have to pass under the lights. And I still see it, the fifth shadow, the impossibly dark black shade that seemed to swallow up the ground it covered. It followed me every time I left the box, down every row of cars, across both lots, even to the porta-john, like a loyal dog on my heels. Not that the thought has gotten any easier, but I have felt less concerned with it each passing day. I know that as soon as I get back to my box, with the door locked and the lights on, the shadow won't bother me anymore. It was like an unspoken rule between us. Maybe that's how I got careless, thought we were playing a fair game. Thought perhaps we might just coexist. Well, I guess that last part's true. When I got back to the box, I realized that I'd left the door open. I guess I didn't shut it all the way when I left because it was wide open when I walked back up the gravel path to it. The doorway was dark, which unnerved me because I know I left the lights on when I'd left. I turned on my flashlight and shot the beam into the box. Empty? Nothing but my chair, my desk, and my dark box. I bolted for the door. I don't know what possessed me just then, but I knew I needed to get inside as quickly as possible. It was no longer the unsettling feeling of something being out of place. I was in danger. As I ran, I moved the beam of the light to my feet. Some primal thought in my head reasoned that if I severed my 5 shadows from my feet, I could possibly outrun them. Stupid, I know, but in my defense, I think I was out of my mind at this point. As soon as I crossed the threshold, I slammed the door behind me and locked the deadbolt and stared at the window. Nothing. An empty gravel lot with a couple of cars in it. Just like always, I felt like a child again, running from a dark room to escape some imaginary monster or demon in the middle of the night. Still, I was safe and back in my box. I reached across the room to flick the light switch. It wouldn't budge. No give at all. I almost didn't want to look. Somehow, I knew what was happening. I'd seen enough horror movies to know where this was going. I looked over to my hand and shined the light on the switch. There it was, my shadow. Except it wasn't shadowing me anymore. It was pressing the opposite side of the switch, refusing to let me turn the bright lights back on. I'm sitting in my chair now, writing this. The light of my phone is kind of soothing, now that I think about it, but the battery is getting low. You always hear about stories like this, where the main character does something heroic to get themselves out of the situation they find themselves in. That's not me. I'm just your average overweight Midwestern hick, sitting in my dark box with my dying phone, and my extra shadow reading over my shoulder.